Okay, this is 8th grade activity 6.1. Our objective today, students will develop an understanding of perfect squares and be able to solve for a square of a number. The standard covered is 8EE2. The page numbers out of the hardcover book are pages 230 through 235, and out of the practice journal, page 116 through 120. Today you're going to need your practice journal, so go ahead and open up your practice journal to page 117. Okay, on page 117, we have an activity here where we're going to be working with finding, if we have a square, finding the side lengths when the area is given. So it says, work with a partner, which we're going to work together. Use the square root symbol to write the side length of the square, then find the square root. Check your answer by multiplying. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do number one first. So first of all, perfect squares are going to be squares where when you take a number times itself, it would give you the number underneath. So for example, here, the square root of 121 is the same as 11 squared. Okay, so 11 squared or 11 times 11 gives me that 121. So for this first part of this activity, we're going to practice using a calculator, but not using the square root button. And then in the activity 2, we'll go ahead and use the calculator to help us with that. So in this situation, what we're saying is when we have a square, we know all sides are the same length. So if we know that the area is 121, well, what number times itself would give us 121? Well, that's the opposite of a square root. So the square root of 121 is 11 times 11. So to check ourselves, we would either use our calculator off to the side, do 11 times 11, which is going to give us that 121, okay? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and try this. Now, I'm going to jump around, so I'm going to have you flip to your, well, I think letter D is at the bottom of your page, and then we're going to flip and do a couple off the back side, just because they're ones that are more complex, and then I'm going to leave a few of the more basic ones for you to do independently. So here I have find the side length if the area is 361. So one method that you can use to be able to find the square root or what number times itself would give you 361 is what we call just trial and error. If you have a square root button, that's great, but I still want you to practice this concept. We will use the square root button in a little bit. So if I was going to do this, I don't know what 361 with the square root is off the top of my head. I'm good with the ones that are those multiplication facts that I learned when I was younger, like 3 times 3 is 9, 4 times 4 is 16, and so forth, because those are ones that I already have memorized. But this one I don't know. So I'm just going to randomly start with a number. So maybe I'll check 15 squared, 15 times 15, and see, is that smaller than 361 or bigger? So 15 times 15 gives me 225. Well, if I compare that to this, that's smaller. So it can't be 15. I'm going to have to go up a number or up several numbers. So maybe now I want to try, I don't know, because that's quite a big difference. It's over 100. Let's try 18 times 18. Okay, 18 times 18 gives me 324. We're closer. I'm at 324. I need 361. So let's try the next number up, which is 19 times 19. 19 times 19. When I do that, I get 361. That's the number that I'm looking for. So my side lengths on this one are 19 miles for each of these. Okay, so that's working with one where we have nice perfect whole numbers. We're going to go ahead and jump to your next page. So flip your page in your practice journal, and we're going to do F and G off of the back side, and then I'll leave one of those for you to do independently. So on letter F, now I'm working with where I have decimal numbers, but we're still working what you would call perfect squares. In other words, they're going to give us a square root. It's just going to be a decimal square root. So I'm going to go ahead and do trial and error once again on this. So let's see, if I think 4.4, well, if it was 4, each side would have to be 2, right? If I just had it be 4, because 2 times 2 would give me 4. So I know that it can't be, it's got to be around 2, but it's going to be a decimal number. So I'm just going to start trying like ones like 2.1. So I'll try 2.1 squared. Okay, so let's see. 2.1 times 2.1 and see what it gives me. That gives me 4.41. That's exactly what I need. So I just found out that my side lengths on this are 2.1. And then my label was meters. Okay, so let's try our next one. Let's go ahead and do letter G together. Now this one, we're working with, the area is set up in a fraction form. So let's remember that when we do numbers like this, we want to find the square root of that, or we can say what number times itself gives us 4 over what number times itself would give us 9. So we can break it down into the top versus the bottom. So if I were to say, well, what number times itself is 4, that would give me 2. And the square root of 9, or what number times itself gives me 9, that would give me 3. That's what I need. I've got 2/3 for each of these. And then my label is feet. Okay, so that one's a little more complex. We have worked with square roots of simple fractions before, but here it's just in another format. So what I would like you to do is go ahead and pause your video and work through the ones that we have not done. So you're going to do B, C, and E. Using your calculator to help you, please do the trial and error. In our next activity, we're going to go ahead and review how to use that square root button. But for this one, I want you to use trial and error. And yes, you may use your calculator to help you. Go ahead and pause your video and work through that now. Okay, so when you're finished with that activity one, when you're finished with this whole activity set, you can grab my answer key and kind of check yourselves to make sure that you were correct on those ones that you did independently. So here we have an activity. It says the period of a pendulum. So remember, a pendulum is where you've got a ball that's swinging back and forth. And it says the period of a pendulum is the time in seconds it takes for the pendulum to swing back and forth. The period T, so they're using T just to represent how long that took, is represented by T equals 1.1 times the square root of L, where L is the length of the pendulum in feet. So they're going to be changing this string length on here to change the length of that pendulum. Okay, so here's where we're going to go ahead and use our calculator. Now, my calculator that goes with the smartboard does not have a square root on it, and my computer calculator doesn't show up on the screen. So I'm going to kind of take you through the steps. With you working your calculators, I'm going to kind of verbalize and show some different pictures, but I do not have a calculator that will work with my smartboard that has a square root button. Okay, so when we go through and we work through this, to do square roots on your calculator, you should have a button that looks something like this. That's called the square root button. Now, it's going to depend on your calculator. Some calculators you have to push that first, and some calculators you punch in the number first and then hit that square root button. So you're going to have to go through and practice it. So to practice it right now with numbers that are pretty easy, let's just practice some basic square roots where we actually know or should know the answers to. So if I had the square root of 9, and on my calculator that I use, when I punch it in, I have to do the number first and then hit the square root. So the buttons that I push is I do I do 9. So I punch the 9 button and then I punch the square root button. Now, if you do that on your calculator and you get an error or it doesn't give you an answer, then you need to reverse your buttons. So some of you might have to do square root first and then do your number. So you're going to have to practice that. In either case, when you do this, if you once you figure it out, you should get a 3 for an answer. So you're going to have to figure out your calculator, which of those methods it is. Now, if you're not sure, pause your video and check with me so that I can help you figure out your button sequence on that, or check with somebody else around you. Okay, so now if we go through and we work through this process, I'm going to do the writing down below. So we've got the equation that's going to stay the same for each of these situations. Okay, so the first equation we have here is we've got, to figure out our time, we're going to take 1.1 times the square root of this. So the square root of 1, what number times itself would give us 1? Well, that would be 1. So we're going to do 1.1 times 1, because we just figured out the square root of this as 1, which is going to give me 1.1 for our time. Okay, so now our next one. We're going to have to figure out the square root of 196. So on my calculator, I punch in 1.96 and hit the square root button. And when I did that, I got 1.4. Now I'm going to take that still times 1.1. And I know that I'm writing this in a separate order because I'm solving my square root first, which is what I need to do. I need to solve that square root first before I take it times the 1.1. Okay, so now when I do that, I get 1.54. Okay, and remember, these are times in seconds. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do the next one. I'm going to go ahead and solve the square root of 3.2 first. So I need to do that first. So 3.24 and hit my, 3.24, hit my square root button. That gives me 1.8. Now I'm going to take that times the 1.1 again. So times 1.1. When I do that, I get 1.98 seconds. Oops. Okay, my next one, square root of 4.0, or 4 is 2. That one I can do in my head because it's a perfect square number that I've known since I was learning my multiplication facts. And then I'm going to take that times 1.1, which gives me 2.2. Okay, we'll go ahead and do one more. So 4.84, I need to do the square root of that. So that gives me 2.2. And now I'm going to take that times 1.1 on my calculator. And when I do that, I get 2.42. Okay, so you understand the process. So now what you guys are going to do is you're going to go ahead, pause your video, and finish working through the rest of solving these last four. So remember, you need to solve the square first, get that answer, and then take that answer times 1.1. Okay, so pause your video, finish out this chart, and then we're going to go ahead and continue on with the graphing. Okay, so here's our graph, and I actually should have included yet another number in there, but when I went through and I did my graph, I'll just write it in. We went through and did the 4.84 together, which you guys have that on your table, so I don't need to write that in. We're going to go ahead and now graph this information, and you have this on the page next to where your graph is. So when we graph this, we're going to go ahead and do a line graph. So we have to remember that our L's, these are like our X's. We're used to seeing X and Y, and our T's are, our T is like our Y, and you can see that they are identified in those positions on our graph. They're just using L to represent our length and T to represent our time. So when we graph these, remember it's always over to your X, so over to 1, and then up to 1.1. The way that I would see this as a set of coordinates would be this. Okay, now we're going to have to kind of guesstimate these decimal numbers, approximate where they would be. So when I do this, well, I'm going to go over to 1. So here's my 1 line, and I'm going to go up to 1.1. Every one of these boxes is worth 0.5, going up as well as across. So 1.1 is going to be a little bit above my 1 line. So we'll go right in here. Okay, and remember, if we started out with no length, that would take no time. So we're going to start at 0, 0, even though that was not part of one of our numbers that we had or one of our coordinate sets. So our next one, when I go to do this next dot, okay, I would read this one here as 1.96. So that's close to 2, just under 2. And then, so over to 1.96 up to 1.54. So that's a little over 1.5. So over to 1.96, which is a little in front of our 2. And then up to 1.54, so a little above that halfway point. Okay, so there's my second spot. So now I'm going to go ahead and do my third one. So I've got 3.24, or sorry, 3.24, comma 1.98. So 3.24 is going to be halfway in between that box of the 3 and the next box over, because that next box would be 3.5. So we're going to go in the middle of this set right here. Okay, and then up to 1.98, that's going to be just under 2. So somewhere around there. Remember, we're kind of guesstimating this. It's not going to be perfect. We're just trying to get them as close as we can. So then the last one I have up here right now is I'm going to go over to 4 and then up to 2.2. So over to 4, up to 2.2. So 2.2 is going to be kind of in the middle of this box, not quite. Okay, so those are the ones that we had done together. So what you need to do is go ahead and finish out graphing your last 5 spots. Remember, it's approximation, so try and get that in, and then go ahead and connect your dots when you're finished. So right now, this is what my graph is looking like. It's not going to be a perfect line. It's kind of going to be a curved line. And mine might not look perfect up here. Like I said, we're approximating where those are at. So you're going to go ahead and continue finishing out that graph, and when you're finished, grab the answer key and kind of check yourself. Don't worry if your graph is slightly off when you check your graph, but make sure that your numbers are correct.